Yeah.
I mastered the art of hitchhiking at a young age. I don't mean to be egotistical about it, but I broke the code when I realized it was all about eye contact. If I
Ah,
could make eye contact with someone, they would pull over.
right.
And I mean, I started at age 9.
Yeah.
So that was hitchhiking up a hill. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, lots of hills. And we lived halfway up a hill and no sidewalk, windy road, cars going real fast. I didn't like walking up there, particularly in the summer when it was hot. So
Right.
I'd heard about hitchhiking and I'd seen soldiers hitchhiking. So I just put my thumb out in the first car that came by, gave me a ride, and I thought, wow, that was pretty cool. And
Yeah.
I didn't do it though. I was too young, I mean, to go hitchhiking. But by the time I was 12, I was out hitchhiking to my friends' houses and getting downtown and so forth. And then it just kind of became my release. I just
Right.
would take off and go somewhere, and I could go lots of places because I didn't need a car and I didn't need any money. And as a young teenager, 13, 14, that being able to get around and be mobile, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's everything, right? Freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of freedom. It was a beautiful thing. I'm grateful.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you are watching or listening. This is the Holistic Monitor, and I'm your host, Nick Sconia. The Holistic Monitor is a wellness podcast featuring life energy research, health and wellness transformation, self-improvement and empowerment, philosophy, spirituality, and now guest interviews as well. We look forward to your comments on our YouTube channel at Holistic Monitor, and you can also listen on the go with us at Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. And with that, let's get today's show started. And how is everybody doing today? This is Nick Sconia with the Holistic Monitor Podcast. On today's episode, we are honored to have a very special guest, Patrick O'Brien, who is also known by his alter ego, Kozmos Lovejoy. Patrick is the author of the captivating book, The Adventures of Kozmos Lovejoy, EXP, a thrilling tale of adventure, enlightenment, love, and personal discovery. We delve into his fascinating story of achieving personal growth and success through his unique life path. In his book, Kozmos sets out on a journey to discover the hidden potential of humanity during the revolutionary spiritual renaissance of the 60s and 70s. We are excited to hear more about his journeys, and he has a special offer for listeners at the end of the show, so be sure to get to the end. So please welcome Patrick O'Brien here today on the Holistic Monitor. The Adventures of Kozmos Lovejoy, EXP. What does the EXP stand for?
It stands for expanding.
Expanding. Okay.
Yes.
So Kozmos Lovejoy, expanding. And it
Yes. It
does
was a
seem,
book.
what I've read in the book, it does seem like that is exactly what's happening, is you're expanding out in
Exactly.
life.
Like the universe, cosmos being the universe, expanding with love and joy. And
Yeah.
that's how the name came.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, and that's in the book as well, the,
Yes.
the name. Now, what I love about the book right off the bat is the clarity of the experiences, memoir style, the
Uh-huh.
writing. It really brought me back to that time and place. Even the lingo that's used, it's you know where you're at in time. You know, it really locates you in time and space. Right away, I was like, wow, I'm there. I'm riding along with, you know. Um,
Right.
that to me was really powerful because it's just a great way to tell a story that is, I'm assuming, fully true. Is that?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Only the names have been changed to
Only the
protect the
names have
innocent.
been changed to protect the guilty.
To protect the guilty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I appreciate your saying that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's important. That was my intention. And because it was so old, it all took place between 1969 and 74.
Right.
Uh, I wrote about 20 pages in 1976, and I wrote the story down because I thought you're going to forget this. And I haven't forgotten it, but it did give me the moments. It brought them back, having those sheets to look at as I wrote and remembered. Tried to use detail, and the dialogue, of course, is a little more flexible because you can't remember exactly what people said, but I tried to get the emotion that they were expressing and keep it all true. I say at the very beginning, I think Jack Kerouac said, write the truth. There's nothing else to write. And that was kind of my inspiration. So I tried to keep it as detailed as I could to bring that about. So appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank
no, it's fantastic. And you have the names, and of course you've changed them, but you know the places and the people and all of the things. Definitely probably helpful to have had a log of it, have had written it down.
you.
And
Right.
you did a lot of hitchhiking.
I did.
Yeah.
I mastered the art of hitchhiking at a young age. I don't mean to be egotistical about it, but I broke the code when I realized it was all about eye contact. I
Ah,
could make eye contact with someone, they would pull over.
right.
And I mean, I started at age 9.
Yeah.
So that was hitchhiking up a hill. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, lots of hills. And we lived halfway up a hill and no sidewalk, windy road, cars going real fast. I didn't like walking up there, particularly in the summer when it was hot. So
Right.
I'd heard about hitchhiking and I'd seen soldiers hitchhiking. So I just put my thumb out, and the first car that came by gave me a ride. And I thought, wow, that was pretty cool. And
Yeah.
I didn't do it though. I was too young, I mean, to go hitchhiking. But by the time I was 12, I was out hitchhiking to my friends' houses and getting downtown and so forth. And then it just kind of became my release. I just
Right.
would take off and go somewhere, and I could go lots of places because I didn't need a car and I didn't need any money. And as a young teenager, 13, 14, that being able to get around and be mobile, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's everything, right? Freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of freedom. It was a beautiful thing. I'm grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a little bit of hitchhiking, and I got stuck at a few exits. And it
Right.
may be that I wasn't able to get eye contact. Cars
You
speeding
know,
past
yeah, exactly.
or
I
on
remember
ramps.
one time I was hitchhiking. I had the book is about a spiritual experience, and I had a transformation of my life. And one ride, and I was always very quiet when I got in a car.
Yeah.
And one time I started talking about some of my spiritual experiences to the guy that was driving the car. And he said, "Oh, I forgot my briefcase," something like that. He said, "I'm going to have to take this next exit, and I'll drop you off. And I see you when I come back. I'll pick you up." Well, I never saw him again.
Right, right.
And I learned that there was a little bit of a code, not a code. What do you call it? Manners in the
Yeah,
car.
yeah. Dinner
Never
table
understood
manners.
the conversation. Never rolled down a window. I just
Right.
spoke when spoken to, and I really enjoyed being along for the ride, and I learned a lot about people, because they opened up when you don't say anything for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of
Yeah.
times you find it for longer trips. It's they need company or they need somebody to keep them awake.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
I found that is pretty common. It's gonna be a long drive across the state through the night. Having somebody in the car, having you know people in the car after picking up multiple hitchhikers is a
Right.
way to like stay awake through the night.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
multiple hitchhikers. Now I know that you are a professional hippie hitchhiker.
Yeah, yeah. I've been there, done that. Yeah. Definitely a
Yeah,
great way to travel. A great way
exactly.
to move, and you meet a lot of different people. I didn't have any bad experiences, so I think I lucked out on
Uh-huh.
that. There were some iffy situations, but nothing
Right.
that nothing ever was bad. People, saying here's $5 for food, or
Sure.
here is some food, or whatever, and getting you to the next place. It's definitely
Yes.
a great way to meet people, to see the country. It definitely puts you in some area. I got stuck in Phoenix, and it
Oh,
was in the summer, so it was pretty hot. Not a good place
yeah.
to be in the summer.
Uh-huh.
And that was down in Tempe for a week, trying to get north to the cooler temps, to the cooler
Sure.
temperatures, and definitely not ideal, but again, very, very free, very freeing,
Exactly.
you know, as you can only have so much on you at a time. And
Right.
did you consider hitchhiking as kind of like the beginning steps on your spiritual journey?
It definitely, particularly in retrospect, because it required that I let go of outcomes. Never really
Right,
sure when I was going to get somewhere or if, and things happened. You couldn't. It wasn't. I couldn't count on always being where I said it was going to be.
right,
Although I was pretty fortunate in the way I learned how to hitchhike, where I stood, which side of the intersection, had to make sure there was, you wanted to be on the other side after the cars had gone through the intersection,
right,
and that
right.
there was a place for them to pull over. And sometimes they'd have to walk to find a good place where they could pull over and so forth. But as far as the spiritual, yeah, it was constantly being in the unknown and meeting new people. And I just really, I loved it. I mean, I really wanted to move. When I'd get
Yeah.
into a tight emotional situation with my girlfriend, I remember one time I was in San Francisco and we had a little disagreement or something, and I just had to go. Well, 2 days later, I was in New Orleans
Yeah, there
and
you go.
called her
Yeah.
up and said, "Hey, I'm sorry," or whatever, and she said she's sorry, and so I hitched back. But I mean, it was like another time. I was in San Francisco. It starts off in San Francisco, and I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to San Francisco State University, and I studied painting at the Art Institute. And I lived in a hotel in North Beach, and a lot of hippies and painters and artists and so forth. And after I'd had this spiritual experience, one night I left my job and I just had to hitch, and I went over to Berkeley and caught a ride up to Truckee
Mm, mm-hmm.
up, on the other side of Reno. And I'm not going to tell all the stories because there was a lot of things intertwined there. But
Yeah.
I ended up hitchhiking, and I met a woman who was driving to Michigan. And I just went for a ride. I went to
Yeah.
Michigan, helped her load up her truck. Do you mind if I tell you the story?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
That'd be
okay.
great.
So, I had an experience with the Gnostic Christ, the symbolic, the Christ energy, not so much a religious Jesus,
Right.
although certainly that part. But in any case, I was working on my shift at the spaghetti factory in North Beach, and this voice said, "Follow me." And I thought, wow, this is kind of, how am I gonna, I've got to start my shift, and so I went ahead and went with it. I went to the bartender and I couldn't lie. I just said, "Hey, listen, I'm not going to be able to work my shift. Could you please help?" Because I couldn't, and he got someone to replace me. So
Mm,
I left and I didn't know where to go. I started going toward Marin County. And then I went back toward, that wasn't going anywhere. I turned around and went over the Bay Bridge to Berkeley, caught a ride in Berkeley up to Sacramento. That's where I caught the ride to Truckee. And in the morning, about 6:30 in the morning, summertime, I'm walking along the Truckee River, and I see a car go by. It was a brand new Ford four-wheel drive pickup truck, a big Ford pickup. And there's a beautiful woman in it, and she's wearing this lavender scarf, and she goes zipping by. And I thought, wow, I'd love to catch a ride with someone like that. And 15 minutes later, that truck pulls up behind me and picks
mm,
me up, and we start talking. And it turns out that her mother had cancer. Her father had given her his truck to go back to Ann Arbor and pick up her ceramics and her kiln. And she had been praying for someone to help her.
mm.
And amazingly, that's how we came together. We met, we spent 4 or 5 days together. I went back to Ann Arbor and I helped her load the truck with her kiln and all of her ceramics, and we met some of her friends there and so forth. Came back and I said, could you just drop me off exactly where you picked me up on the highway here? I want to make it a perfect circle. And I did. And I saw her once again several years later, because of course, we knew each other. But it was those kind of serendipities that were happening quite often in my life. And that was one that involved hitchhiking and there just being something greater going on, because that's always been the story for me, is there's something going on that's bigger than I'm aware of, and I can sometimes catch up to it. But so that was an amazing trip, and there were really numerous, half a dozen I could remember that are in the book, of those kind of events. So it was a spiritual time, it was the beginning of the Age of Aquarius. I looked in an astrology book, and I saw on February 4th, 1962, there were 7 planets in the sign rising through the sign of Aquarius: the sun, the moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the 7 visible planets. And I kind of thought, wow, this is kind of a moment in this. I don't know that it's necessarily the beginning, because of course it probably started more with electricity and radio and the theosophists in the early 20th century, the early 1900s. Who knows when? It's just a change that we've all experienced. So part of that is serendipity and things happening of their own accord. This Aquarian consciousness.
Oh yeah. Well, and I found that, and that's a thing with, and then why I asked if it was the start of your path, because when you're kind of at the whims of chance, at the whims of randomness, that seems to be when there's a magnification of enlightenment, or a magnification of spontaneous bounty. I don't know. A million different things can come out of it, obviously, but when you're open to receive and your attachments are low, the outcomes can be quite amazing. And and when you're heading somewhere, you're kind of on the path with somebody else, so you kind of almost take a different role where you're not the one in complete control of the vehicle or whatever. For me, I didn't have a car, so it was a good means to move around, and but it put me in a lot of interesting places where I also received the same thing from people saying, "Wow, the timing is impeccable that you're here right now." And I'm like, "Oh, I just got here." How about that? It just must be something to being one with the wind, in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Serendipity comes to mind, where you're just open, and that was it for me. And the more open I could be, the more I wanted to be free. The wind was really it for me. I just wanted to feel the wind. Going hitchhiking was like being outside. I loved being outside, and just being free. And I was free to change my plans. If I met some people or someone, I could go here or there. From your experience, and it really just gave me a lot of freedom to be aware of things I never would have been aware of otherwise.
An experience. And now there's information that you have that you you spent time with Sufis, which I definitely want to get to. That's in the book. I don't know too much about the Sufis, but I know a little bit about it, but not too much. But there's a lot of journeys in between in that I guess it was 4 or 5 years of your time. A lot of the focus back then was on, obviously hallucinogenics were a big portion of the revolution of the mind, finding instant enlightenment, that sort of thing, from the Beatles and all that. Um, and music was really big too.
Definitely.
You know, the music was very different then, and you know, groundbreaking in a lot of ways. Were there any bands that you saw that you know, reminisce on? That was an experience that lent towards
Well, I saw
spiritual.
the Grateful Dead at the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco, and
Oh yeah,
people were passing acid out in little white bags, like a little very small candy bag, you know, and they were dressed as revolutionary soldiers at that time, you know, not soldier, well, you know, the red coats and all that.
yeah,
Maybe you remember Jerry Garcia like that.
right.
And
American flag hat or something.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
And there was uh, well, there was the Jefferson airplane that I saw. Uh, there's another one though that I was trying to think of. That was that the Mercury, Quicksilver.
yeah.
You
Quick
know,
signal and
Quicksilver,
messenger service.
Mercury,
Yeah,
a Mercury band, and they were in
yeah.
North Beach where I saw them around Lombard Street at a little cafe. I think it was called the Mercury Cafe.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
that's it. Quicksilver band,
Quicksilver
and
messenger service. Yeah,
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 and uh, so and I saw the darkening of the light, if you will, at gosh, if I don't have it written down again, what's the
yeah.
name? Altamont Springs,
Oh,
Altamont,
okay.
where there was unfortunately, you know, it was a death. There was
Oh,
somebody was, it was, you know, it was not the bright, it was the kind of the end of the bright light of the hippie summer of love, which was like 67 and went on.
yeah,
And then in 71 or two, it was, there was some real darkness that came with it
yeah,
in San Francisco in particular. Um, and it was, you know, not exactly what the book is about by any means, but, you know, that's what was happening. And that's why people were leaving the city and going to the communes and
right.
uh, like that. So, but the music scene was really, you know, mainly just the music coming through the air.
Yeah,
It wasn't that I was at a lot of concerts, although I was at the Fillmore and in Golden Gate Park and so forth. For the most part, the music to me, the Beatles were like the, you know, divine messengers with their whole love thing, and
yeah,
it was really, I was really into the light and the love, and
right.
that's what was up for me. And you know what happened is, and how I got to the Sufis, which is toward the end of the book, and what the book is about is that I had a dream,
Right.
and in this dream there was a feast, and there was a beautiful, it was a set up in gold and silver and satin and crystal and this desserts and just abundance. And across
Yeah.
from me was a beautiful young woman. I was 23. She was probably 18, 20, and she was 18. And she's in the book has quite a bit about her. Her name is Valerie. And by the way, just a little bit about the names. I changed the names because, you know, some of the people are still around, and I didn't, you know, I just thought, so I started changing names because I didn't want everyone to be thinking I was writing a biography or,
Right.
you know, a true,
Right.
there was a lot of magic. Everything was
Yeah.
true, but I wanted to have this magic about it. And so that's why I changed my name as the author.
Yeah.
I changed, my name is Brian Patrick, and so I changed it to Patrick O'Brien. And
Yeah.
so there was all this kind of magic about it, this story and the dream and the girl. And then at the end of the table was this Gnostic Christ.
Hmm.
And I was so surprised because when I woke up, I thought, wow, who was that girl? Because that's what was so attractive to me as a young man. I wasn't particularly religious by any means, although I had said a little prayer, if you will, if you'd call it a prayer, just God, if you exist, I want to know. I mean, it was like I kind of got into a place with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that it's fun and
Right.
everything, but is this really what it's about?
Right.
And so I had said that little prayer, and then I had the dream sometime later. I never put the two together until later. And a friend of mine called me up and said, would you like to go down to Puerto Vallarta My parents have a house down there for spring break. He was still at the university. And I said, sure. And so I went down there and brought my paints with me. And it turns out that I found a little grass hut, a little palapa, south of Vallarta in a little town called Mismaloya, about 6 miles south of Vallarta, up a stream where there was a beautiful spring, probably 30 feet across and 5 or 6 feet deep, 6 or 8 feet deep. And so I stayed there and painted. And one day, these two girls came walking up the stream, and they were in cut-off Levi's and little halter tops, and they looked American. And I said, "Hey, are you Americans?" And they said yes. And they came over to the palapa, and I offered them some pineapple. And one of the girls pulled a doobie out of her halter and said, "Do you want to share this?" And so we had a little smoke. And when I handed her the doobie, I handed it back to her. I realized she was the girl in the dream.
Wow. Yeah.
And this was the beginning of my spiritual regeneration. And I was just amazed. And we went up to the spring, and there was the two girls and myself, and this one girl and I had a connection, obviously, from the dream. And I told her about the dream. And it turns out that she had been reborn in the light of Christ in Laguna Beach. And she'd been baptized in the ocean there. And she'd had this whole life with LSD in Topanga Canyon and the Buffalo Springfield and different bands. And, she had this whole rock and roll scene going on around her. And she left all that because she too was looking for something. And she introduced me. It turns out that she had these beautiful books. She'd been a student of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was an Eastern mystic. Many people have heard of his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. Yeah. And she had been studying with him in Encinitas, California, where he had a temple. And so she was very much involved with him and Babaji, who was a guru, who'd been her Yogananda's guru's guru. And Babaji is an ancient Christ figure from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So she had these books. The Urantia book was a book about our cosmology and our galaxy and how we're part of a bigger universe. And it had the last 700 pages of it. It was probably 2,000 pages, big, thick book. And she had these in her car. And she had Patanjali and the complete illustrated book of yoga and fasting by Arnold Ehret and the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ of the Piscean Age was this story. Our Bible, what I call the Church of Rome, in about 300 AD, they came up with they said, we're just going to have one story, and that's Mark and Luke and Paul, and these are called the Synoptic Bibles, and that's just this one story. Well, they leave out many other stories that were found in the scrolls in the desert, the Nag Hammadi scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so she had books about that. And she just had this ancient Gnostic Christ consciousness, which she imparted to me. And we just had this amazing connection from the dream to meeting her at the spring to getting the spiritual knowledge, which was just dynamic and transformed my life. And many things happened that you find out in the book. And she and I separated because I got thrown in jail in Vallarta. I couldn't see her. And then they told me to get out of town. And I went back to San Francisco. And then I came down and saw her, and we spent time together again. But the whole book goes on. And so I had this seed planted of this whole new reality. And it was the beginning of quantum consciousness for me. It developed in my life into more the physics of, that we live in this world of three dimensions, time, space, and depth, which is the definition of a box, time, space, and depth. And we live in this box, and that there was more beyond it. And the dream caused me to believe that there was more to life than what was existing in time and space. And then to have the spiritual knowledge bestowed by this incredibly beautiful, powerful, wonderful woman, soul teacher. And so there was, we had a house in Vallarta, we had horses, we had a beautiful place to live, we had an ashram, and it was really something. And so then when I left there, I hit the road because I'm not good at standing or sitting still. And then I went back to New Mexico and eventually learned Kundalini Yoga, lived on an ashram there in teepees. Yeah. And so this all started, this whole spiritual journey started from there. I went to Denver and opened an organic food restaurant and had a yoga school there, a yoga ashram. And then eventually hitchhiked to Europe. Which was an experience, and lived for 2 summers in Chamonix, France, in the French Alps. And I learned the Hazrat Inayat Khan had written a series of books called The Sufi Message. And his son, Pir Vilayat Khan, who many of us have met, he passed away maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But he had grown up in France. He was born actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's an American, but his mother was French and his father was Iranian French. And so he lived in Paris. And because of that, he knew the French Alps. And he had found this vacherie, this old, like an old cow barn made out of stone in the 1800s in a meadow. And the French National Forest allowed him to do meditation camps there in the summer. And so I had been working in a bookstore in Washington, D.C. when I heard about the Sufi camp. And I thought, well, I'll see if I can hitchhike to France and hang with the Sufis. And in fact, I did. I hitchhiked up to Bangor, Maine, and had an incredible serendipitous experience getting a ride on Air Canada to London, landed in London with $20 and went to Dover and got on a hydrofoil to Calais, hitchhiked up to Geneva, which is near Chamonix. And because I had experience in the restaurant business and I had been teaching yoga, was spiritually aware, they allowed me to work there, and I ended up working there in the kitchen and for 2 summers, and learned from Pir some of the Sufi message. And it's very broad. The concept is that they're Islamic mystics. Right. They're from the Islamic faith, but they embrace Judaism and Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. Pir was a Zoroastrianist, and he would do small services in all these different religions at different times. And there were some beautiful experiences I had there and had with him that are related in the book.
Yeah. And Sufism is one of the more accepting of outside, like, yes, there are other paths or ways. It's one of the more accepting sects of that religion, right?
Yes, and Pir's religion of choice, his was Zoroastrianism, fire.
Right.
And he was always teaching about how we are starlight, and that's what makes up our corpus, our body, is we're made up of starlight, and that light. He was very much into light. But yes, they were very receptive to Christianity and Judaism, as I said, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and so forth. Then there was lots of dancing and singing, and I'd been involved with Kundalini Yoga with a man who is a former military officer, Yogi Bhajan, who in the early 1970s started teaching Kundalini Yoga. And I learned the Kundalini Yoga that he taught, and it was very strict. And so by the time I transformed, that's the ashram I started in New Mexico where I worked. I didn't start that, but I was one of the first ones there. And then I went to Denver and started an ashram that was Kundalini Yoga based on Yogi Bhajan's teachings, what he called the Healthy, Happy, Holy organization.
Mm.
And they were really the teachings of Guru Nanak, who was the first Indian guru to promote one God. And but the yogi kind of went off on his own tangent and left his teacher, Guru Maharaj, who was living in India, who was a disciple of Nanak, left those teachings to develop his own whole culture, which I was really not much a part of because I was there at the very beginning and left in 1972. So he started it in 69 and I left him in 72, and it's become quite a large Sikh organization. It's very political, and
Right.
but you know, God is everywhere in everyone, and that's what the Sufis were teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, and now that's 50 years ago, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, or
hard to
51
believe,
even.
isn't it?
Yeah. So here again, you have your recall, not even written down, is very good as far as the names and the places. I find that just really awesome to be able to, you have command over the names of the people that were doing the things that evolved even to this day to become a whole nother organization.
Yes.
Now, the book does end with definitely a mark that there's going to be more tales, more journeys.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
You know,
And the feast goes on because
right.
it's when I left the Sufis that I came back to Colorado, and I learned about I learned about Buddhism and Tantric Yoga and the indigenous tribes, the Lakota. And,
Oh, yeah.
I'm truly a dilettante. I am by no means a scholar. And I just followed my heart where I was taken.
Right.
Information to me was something I digested. It wasn't, it was in the moment. And those experiences, it was a lot like hitchhiking without putting my thumb out. I was going from one part of the feast to another and so forth. But, it was so beautiful because the people of our generation, I'm sure the people of all generations, particularly between the ages of 20 and 30, in our 20s, there was just a lot of easy, comforting camaraderie.
Right.
And we loved one another. And, as I mentioned, there were some dark moments in this hippie scene in San Francisco or all over the world, but for the most part, it was love and be loved. It was share and live and let live. And we knew we were on the edge of something totally different, not unlike what we've gone through post-COVID.
Right.
While the COVID experience has been whatever it is, it's reset our lives. And I don't want to, it's too fresh to get into. I think it was a very spiritual experience that we all had. And certainly for some, it was worse than others. And some lost dear, beloved family and friends. And I don't take that lightly.
Right.
Yet it did transform the way we live.
Yeah.
And for example, of not going to the office. That's just an obvious example. And we're decentralizing our culture. And I think there's just more and more of that. And that's kind of what was happening in the late 60s. It was a decentralization, and we had our don't trust anybody over 30.
Right.
And there's a whole astrology about that. But
right.
so human consciousness evolves, and we are evolving. And what I learned was how amazing we are and how self-reliant spiritually and psychologically and financially that we really are. And now we are really, each one of us, what came to me, we're always growing, but is that we're each holograms. We each
Mm.
contain everything. And what I've been learning lately is a lot about transcending the three dimensions, and the getting from the first three chakras, from the tribe to community to will to
Right.
love, and love being the fourth, and love being light, and moving into this fourth dimension and beyond. Who knows? We're still three-dimensional thinking when we talk in terms of frequencies, or we talk in
Right.
terms of infinity, because the fourth dimension of love is in the present moment. And, we knew that, or we learned about it at the beginning in the 60s, particularly in the 70s. And then we went in a little bit of a different direction in the 80s. And then we kind of came back to this now. And so, I meditate now, realizing that I'm the creator of. It's a mixed thing, because I'm not the creator in that I'm separate from the divine, and it's not really a co-creator, which is a term that's kind of from the three dimensions,
Right.
but it's this idea that we are infinite beings, and that hitchhiking gave me the freedom to experience things that I wouldn't have experienced had I been a little more conventional.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you think of your
And
life
nuts. Yeah.
following suit with school and then after school and college and just maintaining a rhythm without that element of freedom, the winds of change. And then the dream, of course, a very telling thing. I always say, you did ask for knowledge, so
Yes,
you know,
I did.
you know,
And I've had a few of them, and nothing. That was the most dramatic. But I did have a dream about Puerto Vallarta, and and I was in a grotto with him, and something about three questions, and the third one, he said the answer was, I thought he said the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So I saw him later that day, and I was, thrilled that I'd actually communicated with him in a dream state.
yeah.
And so I said, "Oh, and you told me to read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali." And he said, "No, no, no, Parajapati."
Hmm.
And I don't know who Parajapati is.
Yeah.
I know he's actually, I believe, the Lord of the cooking hearth, but I've never read that. But without getting too much into the details, those kind of things happen to all of us.
Right.
And and I think this Aquarian concept of information passing through the air,
Yeah.
Aquarian sign being air rather than Pisces being the water sign and ships and so forth. And,
Yeah.
I mean, this, so you're
Yeah.
close to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's well, and you mentioned that the start of the Age of Aquarius, and from my understanding, it's the heralding. Um, so there's the discovery of the planet that rules Aquarius, or some will say it doesn't. But and you mentioned, or it's mentioned about upheaval of the '60s, and upheaval is like a key word for the planet that rules Aquarius.
Right,
And
Uranus or
Uranus, yes,
Uranus, depending
upheaval
on
and
how people,
change,
yeah,
uh,
revolution.
revolution, and a lot of that sparked from when it was discovered, but also it's this the creation of this country. They can say the whole country is almost founded on that principle. But but in astrology, you have an orb of influence. So once you start getting close to the new age or the new way or the new sign, there's an orb of influence, like a gravity that starts to pull, where the blending of the two worlds begins. And I'd
Yes.
say that like the founding of America or thereabouts, the discovery of the planet or somewhere thereabouts is
Uh-huh.
the start of that gravity shift and the blending
Right.
of the Piscean energy, which isn't necessarily going to be a comfortable shift to Aquarius. They're not opposite elementally, so they're not an aggravated cusp. But it's a cusp nonetheless. So as we approach, as we get closer, we're fully becoming in this age. So you could definitely check the 60s as a big wake-up call,
Yes.
maybe on the personal and social level for a group of people. It's not everybody, but a large group of people that were open to it. The mind shift, the add of the hallucinogenics, and the ability to shift perceptions, but also the communes. I think I look at movies that were put out in, I believe it was late 70s or middle to early 70s, was Logan's Run, and everybody's very communally living,
Right.
and but in pods in their own little like dome, like
Uh-huh.
cities or towns or whatever. And when you look at the pandemic, what that kind of did to everybody, it was another horn call of Aquarius,
Yes.
saying, cloister, gather in. The social won't be necessarily so much in person. And as you see, I mean, you look at everything in the world, and you could have called most of it by knowing how Aquarius is. You could say, oh, well, in the future we're going to be connected more mentally.
Yes.
Now we see it's probably got a technological twist to it. But even your experiences with these dreams, it's a perfect example of the connection and on a
Right.
psychic level through
Right.
the air,
Yes.
Um, and yeah, I mean, it, Facebook was founded in in Aquarius, so it makes the whole company an Aquarian company.
Uh-huh.
And it's definitely a social network. It even coins the word of social network. It's just a very Aquarian airy type of idea.
Mm-hmm.
Gemini, being the first air sign, is also typified to when we're really young and we realize there's people outside of, there's like friends, there's other people, there's a third, it's the third
Right.
sign. We say
Right.
the twins, but it's like there's another, but then there's also somebody that's not related. There's a
Mm-hmm.
third, you know,
Yes.
a friend. And then you have Libra, which is the partner. So you have another, and it's a partner. And
Mm-hmm.
then Aquarius, you have society, you have a social, a community.
Right.
It's a group think. So we're going
Mm-hmm.
into group think. So we already know there's going to be a twist of some kind of psychic, telekinetic change or shift or ability that's available. I think that through meditation, those that are able to start sharpening the mind, like it is a sword, will be able to wield it and utilize it in a lot freer way than they could have in a watery age, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
who knows?
Well, the other idea is energy
Yeah,
and communicating energetically.
right.
Part of what I learned originally was about the chakras and
Yeah,
the sixth and seventh chakra. The chakras are aligned to the endocrine glands, and two of the endocrine glands that most people have heard of are the pineal gland or pineal gland and the pituitary gland. And you know, we live in this three-dimensional world of time and space and matter because we have physical senses that
right,
direct us. We touch the glass, and it's we can feel it because we have things that sense matter in our physical senses. Or we see something and we see the depth, and because that's how our eyes are. It's not that. So where I'm going is that this world doesn't exist outside of us. We're
right,
becoming aware that it exists within us. And we know from science that 99% of what we call matter is really vacant space. The mass of an atom is like less than a hundredth of
right,
the, the makeup of a molecule. And so this energy, we're learning more about it. And when we activate the pineal gland, a teacher that I've been studying, Joe Dispenza, whose books I've been reading,
mm-hmm.
he talks a lot about activating the pineal gland. And through pineal gland activation, we it's an antenna. And when you put what he teaches is when you use the cranial sacral or the cerebral spinal fluid, and in Kundalini Yoga, you take that out of the first chakra and push it up through what they call the Sushumna, up the spine, and open the thousand petal lotus, we'll say.
Yeah.
And what he teaches is that when you use that fluid, that the pineal gland sits on a bed of crystals. And first of all, it's only the size of a grain of rice.
Right.
So this is not like an olive or something in your
Yeah.
brain. It's very tiny, and the crystals are even tinier. But this cerebral spinal fluid comes up, puts pressure on those crystals, and creates what's called a piezoelectric effect. That's when you take a mechanical pressure and you get an electric energy. So the pineal gland becomes an antenna that allows us to access the fifth dimension. And then it's like a TV, like, how does the TV work? Most people say, well, you turn the remote on. And,
Yeah. Right.
but the way that a TV works is through this piezoelectric effect that takes energy. The antenna on our TV takes energy, electrical energy, and turns it into visual. And
Right.
that's what people are teaching about activating the pineal to have this, like in the Old Testament, it says, when your people have no vision, they're lost. Well, it isn't necessarily the vision of seeing our feet.
Right.
It's the vision of this pineal gland activation, or there's a story in the Old Testament about Jacob and how he wrestled with God in a place called pineal. I mean, that's a pretty direct link.
Yeah.
And while I'm sure many of the stories in the Bible are true as stories, they actually happened, they're also metaphors and for different meanings. And wrestling in pineal could very well be, it had to do with dreaming and so forth. So anyhow, I know, all I know is what I know. And I don't know what I don't know. There's some phrase about that,
Yeah.
people like to say, I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. And of course, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But I just feel so grateful even to have this conversation
Yeah.
because it's a blessing to even have just a glimpse of the possibility that there's something more.
Right.
And I think that's what we're all experiencing. I think that was part of our, quote, our generation and the generations that have followed us, and the beautiful generations that are coming on. I have children in their 30s, and I'm very grateful for the new generation, and I love the internet because it's such an Aquarian concept
It
of
really is.
connected, and there's so much that we can learn. And
Yeah.
even though if we're not aware, we can be hypnotized by marketing and think that we're three-dimensional creatures and we better look out and they're going to protect us, or you have to have a
Yeah.
authority figure tell you what's wrong
Right.
with you and so forth and so on. And this freedom of the Aquarian concepts are that we are the all and the everything, and it doesn't mean that we're egotistical. It just means that we're part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you get a lot with when you do yoga and you do Kundalini exercises, that you get a lot of um, binding or opening up to the reality that there is a connection,
Yeah.
that we are bound within a space, but we're also able to liberate ourselves, always able to make a choice and a decision. I think that's typified in the letter T. This is a thing I have with the letter T, is that it's kind of like if the coils of the Kundalini were bound, and then at the top they get to be free, but you as a person still have a choice to go left or go right, and
Uh-huh.
that is the destiny or fate. How do you push your life? Which way do you go? And do you ever really have a choice, or are you following always your fate? Where you're fated to go. It's hard to say. But at the T, when you come to an intersection, you can choose left or right.
Right.
Um, that again goes to the winds of change and just having that dynamic of freedom to make a liberated choice, or a choice that's going to be the best option out of two, and not being stuck to go one way because that's just what you have to do, or the programming. I call it following the record player around. Always go left. Whatever it might be. You
That's how they
always have a
go.
choice.
Right.
But I think that liberating that energy is a good first step to gaining the freedom to make choices that are proper for ourself to become more realized and actual, and we could find ourselves in random lands and faraway places, you know, at crystal caves and things like that,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
doing kind of amazing things. And I think that when people read something like this, it's very historical, um, which and again I love. It takes you right back there, and you totally get a vibe. The responses over the phone. I can't come up with any right off the bat, but there are responses that you would hear. In the
But
'70s, in the early '70s.
calling somebody up on the phone and nobody's home.
Yeah, well, there
There's
you go.
no
Nobody
answering
answers.
machines. They're using a payphone,
Yeah,
and
gosh, the payphones. Yeah, they're all gone.
well, being a
Yeah,
hitchhiker, I used the payphones when
quite
I
a bit.
knew where I was going to have somebody come and pick me up.
Yeah, gosh, and it was in the early 2000s when the payphones started really just vanishing.
Oh
I
yeah.
remember it because it was like, wow, what do you do if you, I was doing a lot of traveling at the time, and I was driving, but payphones are just one of those means. And I didn't have a cell phone for quite a while. Um, so payphones were my way of calling people and keeping in touch, and they started
Hmm.
disappearing.
Right.
you know? Um, well, and what I like about going back in time like that is it feels like, you're in a place, in a space where anything's possible. Um, I think that a good message would be that even today, people could still just do that. They may feel like only back then could that have happened. Could that be possible? But it seems like you fell upon very good spiritual guidance along the way. And I feel
Hmm.
like that could be possible for anybody at any point in time, any place, anytime, you know?
Yeah, and it's within. We're human beings, and
Right.
it's kind of trite to say we're not human doings, but
Right.
it's so.
Yeah.
Being present is um, is the real blessing. And we don't, I think part of what we learned from the COVID experience was that we were doing a lot of things that were not necessary. And
Right.
for whatever reason, you can get into the politics or the psychology, but without going there at all, it's just like the, the true presence of being will attract. So it's more of attracting. Like you think that's kind of an Aquarian concept.
Mm-hmm.
Attraction, not promotion, is what.
Right.
So we've been promoting and promoting and promoting and of course breaking things into particles so that we could sell them. Whether it's a disease, for example, with
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals, we can heal ourselves. And the Bayesian idea was we need an authority from outside to tell us how to do it.
Yeah.
But the Aquarian concept is that be still and know. And in that, but if you tell someone, so so that's just fundamental to me is that
Yeah.
concept of be still and know, and everything is pretty good. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty amazing how our lives have gotten better because we're not commuting like we were. I
Right.
think one of the big things and look was when March 13th of I guess it was 2021 when they shut everything down.
2020. Yeah.
Was it 20? Yeah,
20.
excuse
Yeah.
me. Right, and the air got so clean. It had never been so clean over Florida, or I mean over Miami or
Right.
Los Angeles, because the planes weren't flying, the trains weren't rolling, the trucks weren't, and the
Yeah.
commuting wasn't going on, and the air got clean in a matter of weeks. We had
Right.
pure air. And the dolphins came back to areas where they'd never been before. And I
Mm.
remember hearing about the deer in Japan who'd come into the city parks.
Right.
And because it was, nature was kind of
Yeah.
taking over.
Nature
And
was
then
like,
they said,
nature was
well,
like,
we're going
it's
to
all
have to
clear.
get back to where we were.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, no, no, don't, and so we had that moment, that point of
Yeah.
reference. Whether the machine, the media machine, whatever that can, I hate to use the word controls, it sounds like that, directs or influences, will say, this whole media influence is always saying there's not enough, look out,
Yeah.
it's only 20 cents, get it now,
Yeah.
sales over tomorrow.
Right.
All this kind of thinking, which is just not really human. I mean, of course it is, and on and on. There's always left and right in people's opinions, but it's just my opinion. We're human beings, and by being present, we can attract many things into our life that
Yeah.
we think that we have to go and do things to acquire. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And then, did this book come about through or during the lockdown?
yes and no. It was pretty much done before then, in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much had it, but then it didn't finish because of the COVID, and we had issues with editing and promotion, or getting the final copy the way it's supposed to be. It wasn't really until this last fall
Mm.
that I got the final edition.
Yeah.
So it was no, it was written. It was written in 18 and 19. It was being written from 2010 on
Okay.
and off. But
Yeah.
anyhow, so no, but it's just kind of come about in its own life recently in the last few months.
Yeah. A lot of times with book publishers, it takes a little time to get through the processing of the different, approvals and all of that, and setting things up. So there can be a little bit,
Right.
and of course you have a pandemic, you have a lockdown, you have multiple months of no action, no nothing,
Right.
and a lot
I
of
did
change, a lot of switching around things around, and
well, I published it myself. So
okay,
it was self-published. So I didn't have those kind of issues. It was mainly everyone was just slightly distracted and not really, and so
yeah,
you had to kind of let go and allow, and the
right,
time wasn't right for it. But the experience I had from COVID was the blessing of having a lot of quiet
time, yeah,
time to meditate,
reflection,
reflection.
yeah. Yeah, it was definitely for a lot of people. There was a lot of potential outs coming out of it to be catapulted into a new realm. If you look back in time, we've had, as a country at the very least, this was a worldwide phenomenon. So that's very different, I would say, than most things that we've experienced as a country. But even in this country, 9/11 had a shutdown or a stillness that came about afterward.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of different traumatic events have caused stillness afterward, reflection. Where are we
Right.
going? What are we doing? And things seem to catapult, and a lot of people, a lot of things seem to adjust to live maybe markedly different and potentially better, or more aligned to their purpose instead of getting lost, like you were saying, just getting in these weird labyrinths, lost,
Right.
trying to find a way out, doing stuff that's like, what am I doing? And then, of course, the wake up call, they have a chance to hop out of that or have an excuse to hop out of that. I
Well,
was in a very
look,
similar situation myself. So, I
yeah.
definitely got the vibe, and I took the leap of faith and, changed my situation. and it's been a catapult. I think a
Uh-huh.
lot of people are having that experience. This book for you has probably been a bit of a catapult in a different direction.
Yes.
Yeah,
Uh, inwardly, more and more inwardly, more and more being present in the
yeah,
moment. But if you look at something that's come on the radar, is the student loan uh,
mm, yeah,
phenomena, fiasco, whatever.
right,
Just a huge moneymaker for a very small group.
yeah,
And what's happening is by the schools being closed and this decentralization and the omnipresence of the internet, and now people can learn skill sets, and actually we're going back to being together.
right,
People are going back to work and so forth. But the idea that there's just so much money involved in education, which
yeah,
should really be more Socratic and more of a personal, as I think you
right,
said, you learn from and about yourself,
yeah,
and so we can go within and learn everything we need to know by being still for a few minutes every day.
right,
And we might not learn something that's being taught in books and so forth, but we learn what we need to know to be still, to be present, and to be productive in a purposeful way. That and so this idea, what healthcare, the same thing.
yeah,
We are, and from what I learned and that I write about in the book, is that we are divine, and we know what we need to do, and we don't need a third party or an authority figure or a quote professional to teach us how to do it. And I think more and more, and then when you see all these students that borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
because it
Yeah,
was so easy to get it,
yeah,
and then it's not easy to get out of it, and
yeah,
they're on the
yeah.
hook for more money than they're going to make in the first maybe 5 or 10 years, if they
If they can get a job,
or 20 years or a lifetime.
right?
So
Yeah,
it's like, how did it happen? It was like cigarettes. They used to give packs of cigarettes away in the dormitories of the colleges.
hmm.
There were people that were paid to give away free samples of cigarettes to people that
Wow,
were young,
hmm.
because they would start doing it, and then they'd be a customer for life.
Right, right,
So this isn't this is just something that's happening and we need to be aware of.
yeah,
And by being aware of it, we can transcend it. We can come up with ways to resolve it, to solve these kind of problems that we have. And
hmm,
I think that I'm very optimistic about the future, and I'm optimistic about the future generations.
yeah,
And I'm optimistic about what happened in the 60s and the whole green revolution with ecology and learning about chemicals and how they were destroying our minds and bodies.
right,
And we really didn't need to have a government have label laws. I mean, that's like secondary to what about people being aware of our divine potential that we
yeah,
have. And it's we're in a very small minority that think or talk like this, but it's a
yeah,
vocal minority, and it's a potent minority. And
right,
you know the classic Piscean things are like schools and medicine and legislatures,
yeah.
you
Institutions,
know and I don't know
religions,
how we're ever going to thin the legislatures out, but
right. Well, the decentralization is a big theme with the Age of Aquarius, and you see it within the
exactly.
monetary system. And
And the crypto monetary, yeah.
yeah, and really, when you look at the world, you go back to, let's say, the smallest community that you can, but you keep all of the elements that we have, the monetary exchange is still going to rule the day and make one person really wealthy, likely, in any scenario that you put it in, because it's just the nature of trade. So with the decentralization, you're taking the command or the power of that force of exchange away from but trickery will have it that I'm sure
Well, wait,
it'll be a fight to
yeah,
get it out of hands of these big conglomerates. But it's in the hands of large institutions, and the potential for having a decentralized cryptocurrency is saying there can be more transparency and more liberalness to money, so that
yeah.
it's a little bit more free to have money versus banks making money, basically,
Yes,
by debt.
well, one of the aspects of the cryptocurrency is obviously the blockchain.
Yeah,
And the blockchain has potentiality that's always been attracted to me through what's called smart contracts,
yeah,
or the
right,
Ethereum concept. And the Ethereum is a digital coin, and a company that, so I can have a contract with you to buy your house, and we have an agreement, and you give me the money, and that agreement gets filed in a blockchain. It's one of the links in the chain, making it really super simple. But
yeah,
the idea is that you have transparency, it exists, it's all there, but you have privacy.
right,
And then you can get a court to come and say, is there a reason that this should be revealed? Maybe one of us wants it revealed, but a third party can't come in and say, hey, I want to know how much he gave him because I want the tax dollars on that
right,
transaction. That's a big deal. That
yeah,
the taxes are not as easy to get.
right.
But the point of
Which
it
is why I
is
don't
that
like it.
you can have a mortgage. I could buy your house, or I could buy your car, or we could have an agreement, and nobody knows about it except you and me. And if one of us feels that it's being breached, it exists, and it can be seen. But
Right.
we have transparency and privacy.
Yeah.
And we've had such an issue with privacy because of the internet and our phones, and
Yeah.
people hacking and learning things about us from our hacking the credit, and our personal history and personal affairs.
Yeah.
So the blockchain and smart contracts is a great thing, and I don't, and so I think each one of us, by going within, can have a better uh, understanding of who we are. I can have a better understanding of who I am. I can't necessarily have a better understanding of who you are, although
Right.
I might think I do. But in fact, we're all little holograms. This whole universe, it's clear to me. Yes, you could say I'm crazy, but it doesn't matter. I mean, this does not exist out here.
Right.
I'm projecting it out. And when I first learned that back in the days of Cosmos Lovejoy, I, it was like, I thought, well, the earth is still flat. You go to the beach, it's flat. If you go out in space, it's round. Maybe it's at another higher frequency. It's like interpenetrating waves of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and one day we might all see that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
anyhow,
Depends on the plane that you're on. Depends on the plane
right.
that you're
And
at.
it
Right.
depends on the degree of fear that you harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, well, I don't want to know about that, and it might be bad, or it could be worse. So the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, and
Right.
all these kind of little scary, this whole scary thing, or you better start taking this pill now because you might get that disease later.
Right. Right.
And I've been involved with herbs, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I've learned is that there's something called oxidative stress. And
Yeah.
oxidative stress is too many free radicals, and they're caused actually by breathing. But oxidative stress contributes to all human disease, and it's actually almost the only disease. But medicine, and I have to be careful because I had cancer, and the most loving kind, almost make you want to cry people that were in my life at that time were doctors and nurses and hospital employees, and I just never felt so much love in my life. So I don't have anything, quote, against medical professionals, but the medical model is based on corporate enterprise. And corporate enterprise says, if we can get enough diseases that we have to have a different pill for each disease, then we're going to have a bigger market. And if we just had one disease, which I'll call oxidative stress, free radical damage to the DNA, then there wouldn't be a big business in pharmaceuticals. Or if people start activating their endocrine glands and they get their pineal gland to give off an elixir that causes the pituitary gland to create oxytocin, which is the love chemical, or benzodiazepine. Benzodiazepine is where we get Valium. Benzodiazepine is the model for Valium, and it exists in our brain. Or DMT, which is an hallucinogenic, which is part of this visions. If we have a pharmacy in our body, and it's like when we learn to activate that, there's not a lot of money in it. There could be in the training and so forth, but really and truly, we've gotten away from this simple solution of love and stillness and gratitude. And, you go out in the street and you go on the wrong side of town and everything, you might not make it around the corner with those virtues.
Right.
But then you say, well, what is death? Because that's the big thing. Well, you're going to die, so you better look out. There have been cultures that didn't think about death like we do. And if you take that fear of death away, then how are you going to control anybody? So I have to be careful because I really, I'm not a scholar. I'm just another guy that had a dream and wrote a book about some of the things that happened. And I've had fun sharing it with people, and some people like it and some don't. And,
have you had pushback on the book at all?
Well, a little bit, but unfortunately, mostly from people that know me. And I've had some that know me that are, they're just not interested in it. Yeah, I've had some, I'm just starting to get pushback from Facebook and,
well, that's going to happen.
Online,
it's going to happen.
Huh?
Online, it's going to happen. That's just a given.
Yeah, and it is happening
trolls.
Online.
Yeah.
And, I've gotten, I just feel good. I've done a lot of things in my life and a lot of different income generators, we'll call it, whatever.
Yeah.
And this is what I like the most. And there's a lot of people that I have fun conversations with about the book that, like you're saying, it captures the moment. It takes them for the ride. I never thought I could write dialogue. Okay, and so I had my editor was a proficient editor, an excellent editor, and he said, well, dialogue this. He'd go through it. He never did any writing, but he'd make comments, and often it would be dialogue this. And I thought, I cannot write dialogue. And then I wrote some dialogue once, and I thought, wow, I get to know what the other person's going to say before I say what the first person's going to say. So I got into writing dialogue, and I just loved it. And now I've become a student of Aaron Sorkin, who wrote A Few Good Men and The West Wing and Molly's Club, Molly's Parlor, about gamblers. And there's things that I can't remember right now. But his whole thing is he says dialogue to him is music. He was brought up on Broadway. His parents were involved in the theater. And so he wrote A Few Good Men when he was maybe 27 or 8. But when he was 8 years old, he used to go to the theater, and he'd be behind stage and he'd go to musicals and this and that. And so when he writes dialogue, he said, it's like writing music, which I know nothing about, but it's like music, we'll say. And now I just love to write dialogue. And this is my first book. So hopefully, like you say, there'll be another one. The story does go on. I've written half of the second book, because this is the very first, and then there's the second, and then there's the third book, where I go on and learn about new religions, the Hawaiian religion, the Huna. And I lived in Hawaii for a few years after I was diagnosed with cancer. I went to the beach and started eating herbs and got well and was blessed to go into remission, and learned a lot about Huna and the Huna Hawaiian religion, and learning more about Egypt, and all the religions have they're not the same, but they have it's about love, it's about surrender, and we have free will, we have the will to turn our lives over to God. That's what free will is for a lot of them. But sometimes when I talk about religion, it's like that day in the car when I was hitchhiking, and
Yeah.
people don't want to hear about it, man.
Right. There's a
And
lot
that's
of different
fine.
people been, they've had different experiences with it. That,
Yeah,
politics and religion.
right. Some people,
You
I
know.
think they nailed it when they said, the truth that can be spoken is not the truth.
Hmm. Oh,
And the other is the Tower of Babel. And I
right.
wondered about that. What's that all about? And I don't know. But I do know we have a phrase about babbling.
Yeah.
And, where there's a lot of babble going on the planet. And, this Aquarian concept of how would it be if we could understand people without speaking? And I
Right.
think that we do. And as someone else said, we developed a cell phone that sends messages because that's what we do, except we don't use an instrument. We
Right.
just use our mind. And we're sending messages to one another all the time.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then
yeah.
we respond with words, or words get involved.
Right.
But I don't think words are they're part of the three-dimensional reality.
Yeah. It's, like a sense, in the third dimension, we have this whole construct of our body is a means to understand the world around us through touch, sight, sound, smell, taste. And you could say that talking is a way of engaging that reality. Um,
Hearing, I mean, talking
yeah,
is connected to hearing.
it's part of
Uh,
it's basically like we're singing a song when we're talking. We're doing tones, and uh, and of course that also has command prompts for the brain. So you know, uh, we can consciously start to guide our subconscious. I think you get a lot of this with meditation to start seeing the thoughts go by and the words in your in your head, and start to gain control over what's being said in your head, and gain control of those random images and thoughts that go by as you're meditating. The
yes.
the Kundalini exercise is a very good way to start learning that there's a lot more to the world than what the senses that we've developed to engage this part of the world
The
experience.
three-dimensional frequencies, yeah, between
Right.
matter and light. And the
Yeah.
heart is how we hear. I mean, it has the word ear in it,
Right.
Heart.
Yeah.
And the mind, is this, that we live in an ocean of energy, an ocean of divine love, or an ocean of love.
Yeah.
And because love is what nurtures and bonds everyone together, whether it's a mother and a child, or a puppy, or somebody and you want to help them, or love is real.
Right.
And when we and love is the heart, and it's that fourth chakra in the present moment.
Hmm.
So when we can be present with another person, and we're really listening from the heart, and
Right.
you know, but
And
yeah,
it beats
we're
and it beats.
communicating.
It makes a rhythm. It keeps a rhythm, and it right near the lungs. It has this drum effect. All things that you feel and hear, a vibration
Right.
that's created from the heart. It's definitely a strong connection. The love connection could be said to be the strongest connection, and its opposite would be obviously hate or anger. You know, but all ways of it for us to connect, with the world around us, with the people or things around us, in a very intimate way through the chakra energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and now in this book, it's a lot of formation and journeys that you're doing, finding out about a lot of this stuff, you know, involving the Sufis and Kundalini Yoga, Yogananda, I think, right?
Right.
Um,
And the Nag Hammadi scrolls and the Dead Sea Scrolls,
right.
these are these vases that were sealed and placed in caves 2,000 years
Yeah.
ago. That
The
that's
Essenic. Now you mentioned somewhere the Essenes, and I
well,
have to
yeah,
wonder. It's funny that you mentioned Zoroastrianism and the Essenes, and I wonder if it had anything in linkage with Edmund Brother-Szekely and the
right.
Biogenic Society.
Well, of course, Edmund Bordeaux-Szekely wrote the Essene Gospel of Peace,
Right.
and it was about um, how the Essenes lived, and they did a lot of fasting, and they used gourds for enemas, and they
Right.
cooked their food in the sun, and they yeah. So, but the Essenes, you had mentioned something else. It escapes me right now, but
Zoroastrianism was it?
well, you were talking about
Oh,
Zoroastrianism and the Essenes, and there was something before that. But um, in any case, um, I've forgotten it.
oh, okay. It's all good.
I reserve the right to forget,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. There you go.
but you
Um,
know, um,
well, it's a really interesting link there, and because Zakely goes into Zoroastrianism pretty heavily too in that world of opposition,
yes,
black and white. You know, the chessboard and all of this. I was going to do a show. One of the first shows that I was going to do for this podcast was going to be on Zoroastrianism and the
oh,
Biogenic Society. Because I got turned on to it in the 90s, in the mid 90s. I got a bunch of the pamphlets and
uh-huh,
devoured it. Just great information. Digging in, I find that a lot of whims and ideas that maybe I found on my journeys, um, I further researched them later with the light of the computer and the World
uh-huh,
Wide Web, and
uh-huh.
maybe find things aren't exactly as I had assumed they were. But it doesn't change the truth of what I gained off of the knowledge, if that makes any sense.
Yes,
Um,
makes
the
perfect sense because
the opening that I had, whether or not the information was solid or 100% or anything,
right.
is what really matters in the moment, and not so much getting caught in the minutia, the details of
Well, that,
actuality. It's really what
right.
does the spark, as long as the spark is flowing and the outcome is positive, I think that's the most important thing.
Well, there are two things. One is that this is a fire planet, and that goes back to Lemurian and the Hawaiian religion.
Hmm.
But the thing that I was mentioning before you mentioned about the scenes was the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Right.
which were written the life of Christ and the true teachings of Jesus the Christ of the Piscean Age, not
Right.
uh, the archetype that the Roman Church presented in
Created.
order to control people and generate money.
Right.
And it's not, you have to be very careful because there's a lot of truth in it. But then there's a
Yeah.
different level of truth in Nag Hammadi scrolls, in the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Thomas, the
Right.
Gospel of Judas. These other people that it was totally different than Mark and Luke and Paul in
Yeah.
the Synoptic Bibles. So that's what Valerie shared with me, which allowed me to speak about Jesus and Christ, not even thinking of the religious Jesus,
Right.
but of the Gnostics and the Essenes.
Right.
And then, and so that's the Jesus that was at the end of the banquet table, and he was young and he was laughing, and it was beautiful,
Right.
and uh, and all I could remember was the girl. But the other thing was the fire planet in the Lemurian scrolls, which
Hmm.
are the teachings of the Huna, the
Oh,
Hawaiian
okay.
religion or spiritual wisdom. Is here's their creation story. There was a planet somewhere in this massive galaxy that's described in the Urantia book. They weren't connected to it, but in any case, and this planet was getting old and these people needed to move,
Hmm.
and so they found a fire planet, and they actually came through the sun to this fire planet,
Hmm.
which is Earth. And if you'll notice that we're 98.6 degrees, we're
Right.
fired up. Okay, we're warm. And
Yeah.
this planet has got fire on the inside. It is
Right.
a fire planet. And so they came through the sun, and then over millions of years, really
Hmm.
long time, um, whether they seeded it or not, it became seeded with herbs and flowers and fruits. And then they would come here, and then slowly
Hmm.
they started to inhabit this planet. And there's a book called The Lemurian Scrolls, which is
Yeah.
a beautiful book about this history and how they developed the continent and the culture of Lemuria,
Hmm.
which the Hawaiian Islands are the mountaintops
Yeah.
of the continent that was washed to the sea or buried by whether it was the moon that
Rising.
hit or whatever happened.
Rising
But
oceans.
so it's a
Yeah.
fire planet, and I just think that is so cool.
Yeah.
Like these are just
Interesting.
little things. The stories in the book and what I learned are just like, wow, really?
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
this is just it's a tale, it's a story, and it's based on truth, and
Yeah.
it's not particularly deep, but what I found is that it's deeper than I thought when I wrote it. In
Right.
other words, now going back and reading and I think, wow, that's really connected to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was putting the cake together, I thought there was sugar and there was flour and there was eggs and there was milk, and then now when I read it, I think, oh, there's a story here.
There's a connection. Right.
Yeah, this is connected. So
Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Now, you said you're about halfway through the second book.
Well, yeah. Now I'm gonna have to write it and let it out of the bag, but
Yeah. So
Cosmos comes
get to
back
it.
from this living with the Sufis and having had a lot of things that we didn't talk about happen in his life, and
Yeah.
he comes back to Aspen, Colorado, which
Yeah.
was a whole. And he things changed over that period of time, but still, the feast is the story.
Right.
There were teachings, spiritual teachings. I'm not going to get into this too far,
Yeah.
but about particularly about the Native American and many other things having to do with healing and so forth.
Yeah.
So yeah, that goes on, and yeah, I'm not going to go too far into it, but
Right.
actually, the way the book was written was 2010 after I got diagnosed with, or just before I got diagnosed with colorectal cancer. My father had died, and I realized I was mortal
Mm.
and that I was going to die. And if I wanted this story that I'd written down 50 years before, I need to write it.
Yeah.
So I just started writing like a madman. And over 6 or 8 months, I read about 500 pages. And this book, The Adventures of Kozmos Lovejoy,
There it is. Yeah.
uh, yeah, it came from the first 300 pages.
Wow.
So left a few hundred pages
Okay.
for what else happened because I continued to meet spiritual mentors. I continued to have serendipitous experiences, had wonderful experiences. My children were born. I had a lot of more material business
Hmm.
experiences,
Right.
but Cosmos, the Cosmos the Dreamer was right there.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that wild?
yeah,
That's
just
great.
like you. I mean, look at your life now and what you're doing. And like you say, you got rocketed into a new world after the
Yeah.
COVID, and you have a beautiful young son
Yep.
that I heard laughing and singing one time when we spoke. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's a very joyous kid, that's for sure. And it,
exactly.
prior to my move and my catapult, was not even a thought. Uh,
Right.
with the place that I was at, was really just in a waiting space. So the pandemic coming along was It's been a rough adjustment on certain levels because I had established myself where I lived, but um, I knew I was waiting. I was just waiting for the right moment, you know.
Right.
It came along, and I was in a position with the pandemic the way it was that I could just make the leap, and
Right.
it might not without that still time, it may not have been my thoughts may have been not to take the chance of that change serious. So um, it blessings in disguise. Sometimes
Right.
good things come out of bad times, and vice versa. You know,
Right.
so it's just about, I think, like hitchhiking. You gotta you gotta put it out there, and you've got to be ready to take that first step. And then once you do, where you're going, depending on your situation and where you're actually heading, but you never know where you're going to end up. And life is just like that. It's and I think your book does a really good justice to show like how much can change within just a few years of your life at any point in time. Because even
Exactly.
now for yourself, this book is new, and you're going to be traveling. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really excited. I've had some other issues, business decisions, and financial things that I'm clearing away. This is all I want to do now, and
Yeah.
I've been blessed to have the opportunity to speak to people like you and be on a podcast and it's just enriching my life and people do like the book and that's a joy
Yeah.
because it's fun to be a part of something that makes people feel good.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
it's a real feel good, or it's not a feel good book. I don't know what you call it. I have no idea. I've wanted to write a book and I knew I was going to write this and it took 50 years.
Yeah.
50, and I mean I hardly even think I'm 50 years old, but I'm definitely 50.
Right.
Uh, so
Yeah.
and I was recently in San Francisco where a lot of this takes place. Actually, last week
Hmm.
I was in San Francisco and seeing some of my buddies from the Spaghetti Factory Cafe where we all worked and laughing and I thought, wow, this is for real.
Yeah.
It's still going on. So,
Yeah. How about
yep,
that? Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to the further adventures
Yeah,
of
thank you.
Cosmos, and maybe some of the road tales coming up will be part of another podcast.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for offering to be another podcast. I'd love to be back on your show, and I'm very grateful that you invited me and that we're able to talk as freely. I was thinking, what are we going to call this podcast? Two guys talking. You know, we kind of covered a wide range of things.
Yeah.
See what you do with it, but I'm honored
Yeah.
to be on your show, and
No, very
it's a
happy to have
treat.
you. You know,
Well, thank
and a
you.
great perspective. What a great adventure it really is, and I love how it just intertwines just so many branches of spirituality, of approach, dreams, the dreaming portion, which just you don't see that a lot. You really don't. You don't hear about people having dreams that are evolving and coming true, and it's just amazing.
We either don't remember the dream or we just don't talk about it.
Or we don't talk
It's
about it, which is weird that you wouldn't. That kind of connection. Um, I believe I don't know if it was the pyramid, but one of the big effigies, it might have been the Sphinx, was found after somebody had a dream about it or something like that. It was buried in the sand. You know,
uh-huh.
it's
Well,
just
I
follow those dreams.
follow those dreams. That's it for
uh,
sure. Well,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you having you on today and you being here and getting a chance to have this discussion. It was really it's a great adventure, and I'm here's the book, and I'll try and
oh, there you go.
there we go. I'll scan
There's
this
that
and put
hippie
this
at the
on the
spring.
on the show there a little bit, and um, I'll link the website for the book.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Uh, where, where
it's
can I get it? Amazon.
bluecornpublishing.com. That's blue, BLUECORNPUBLISING,
Publications.
like
Yeah.
it's spelled.
Oh,
Oh,
publishing.
.com, but we made an audiobook so you can read it. You can
Oh,
get the audiobook, and we have
okay.
a Kindle.
And are you speaking?
Yes, I read it.
Okay, that's the
I
way to
went
do
down
it.
to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and recorded it at the
Wow.
East Avalon Studios, where it was a B studio for all those rockers in the 70s. And
Wow.
well, that was
Perfect.
a fun, that was great. And they did an excellent job of producing it. So it's
That's
professional.
awesome.
And you can get the book on Amazon.
Yeah.
You can get the Kindle, and you get the audio book or the print book on Amazon, or you can find out a lot more. There's a lot more of the backstory at bluecornpublishing.com.
And I'll have that
And
linked, of course. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And if you use SAF, you get
Mm.
a 20% discount
Ooh,
from,
I like that. All right.
yes. So just use the code SAF, and
Okay.
you'll get 20% off anything at Blue Corn Publishing.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And let's have another discussion soon.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much.
Awesome. Yep. Take care. Have a good one.
Okay, bye
Yep.
bye.
Bye bye.